Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey guys, how's everybody doing on this beautiful fall day?
Good. It is beautiful
Very well.
outside.
Yeah.
It's been a lovely fall. I don't know if it's because it's been so dry. I mean, that's not the best
A lot
thing.
of leaf color. There's
The trees are popping.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the trees are beautiful. And I kind of missed that on the very beginning of the color change. A lot of brown, a lot of crispy leaves falling. And then I got into some areas with more trees. And then I was like, hey, the color actually is really good right now. So
if by the time you're listening to this, you're in the gray doldrums
good
of
point, Brett.
winter, know that we are too. But speaking to you from some undetermined past, we were feeling joy.
At the end
Remember
of
that.
October
It's like a time
and a beautiful
capsule.
fall. Yeah.
Yes, it's like I saw the most beautiful orange maple this morning, and it was like neon orange. It was so
the sun
bright
hits
and
them just right.
beautiful.
They seem to glow.
Yeah, it was.
They
It was
do.
pretty impressive.
Yeah.
The maple I have in my front yard, it's usually like beautiful red, and it's just now starting to change. I'm like, what are y'all doing? Y'all behind? What are we doing?
A lot of the red maples in our neighborhood are lagging behind the sugars and others. So.
Yeah, the reds are a little behind this year. Sugars are peak. They were peak 2 or 3 days ago.
Even my bonsai, the reds haven't changed yet, and the sugars have. So
interesting.
Right. Look at us. There's some math in there. There's some science in there. Okay, are you guys ready for your question of the day?
Oh,
sure.
Yes.
Okay. All right. It's about butter. So, okay. So this is more of a I feel like I get to know you more through this question. All right.
Okay.
So when you open up a new stick of butter and you go to get some for whatever you want, you go to get some. How do you slice it? How do you remove the amount of butter you need from, assuming it's not for like a large amount, like, say you're putting it on toast, you're going to throw it in the pan or whatever.
Like a non-measured amount?
Yeah, like you're like
Gotcha.
like a vibes amount.
Yeah.
How do you remove the butter from the thing? I mean, like where on the stick? I guess
it's like a trick question or something.
I know.
Or are you not a butter stick person and you're like a butter tub person? That's also
I'm both, depending on my mood.
I'm a butter stick person. Lots of butter.
Bakers are stick people, I believe.
But sometimes, and Alexis kind of already knows this, but sometimes I have to be careful if I leave sticks of butter out on my counter because I'll come back and there'll be teeth marks in them because my oldest son.
Not from your cat, right?
Right. My oldest son, who also enjoys baking, will see butter on the counter and will very excitedly be like, butter! And
I get that way.
Try to take a bite out of it.
I'm with him.
Like little teeth marks in it.
Yep.
So we know that Bo removes his butter via teeth. Just from, does he like corn on the cob it, or is it like from a popsicle standpoint?
From a popsicle stick.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
That's what he does. But otherwise, I just it depends, if it's been on the counter and it's a little soft.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Or if it's not, or like if you're willing
it's a little
to sacrifice,
soft, where do you take it from?
Oh, just like at the end.
Okay, but at the end, like
yeah.
Okay, I feel like Alexis has an unorthodox method here,
but,
like longitudinally or something weird.
If you're willing to sacrifice a stick of butter and you have like a hot piece of toast and you can just take the stick and
that's good.
It gets a little crummy on the end.
I do that with pancakes.
You're like,
I've done that with
pancakes. Yep.
Brett, what about you?
I'll usually split it the full length and hollow out the middle and take the middle, the butter core.
Do not.
He takes his half out of the middle.
The filet mignon of the butter. Yeah.
The heart of butter.
The butter backstraps.
It's the butter loin.
And then I just throw out the cask, the shell.
You don't eat that part, do you?
Yeah, no. You guys eat the peel? I mean, do you eat the banana peel?
Gross.
You don't eat the butter peel.
Yeah, exactly.
I think my kids
the oxidized nastiness.
No, I mean, I don't know. I go in and I'll say there are some in the audience who are saying, somebody referred to butter being soft, and they're like, it should always be soft because I keep my butter at room temperature on the counter all the time.
Okay.
We keep ours in the fridge. Sorry to all of the people who are correct out there. I would say I just cut it off from the end, probably often at an angle, not straight across. It's not a, I don't line it up.
Perfectly vertical.
I don't get my speed square out to, make a. Why? What's the outlier?
Okay, yeah.
Yes, please tell us, Alexis. What do you do
I
with
think
butter?
about this. I made my lunch today, and I got out some butter because I was making some eggs. And so it reminded me. I think about this every time I get out the butter. When I got married and moved with my husband, and he saw the way I did butter because it's the way I grew up, he thought I was a crazy person. So now I have resorted to what, is probably the more efficient, smart way to do it. But I always think about it, and it brings back fond memories of toast and with my
butter.
grandma and stuff. But anyways,
you assimilated.
Yeah. So we also kept our butter in the fridge. And my mom, I feel like my grandma, everybody I know always took the butter from like the top. So like you open up the flap, on the stick of butter, right? And they would just scrape it. So it's like kind of like a thin little thing. And that's what you would spread like on your toast. Now when you were baking or, probably putting it in a pan, I'm sure they like sliced off, but like that's how I always did it. And I remember when I moved in with my husband, he was like, I did that. And he was like, what are you doing?
It sounds like you're interpreting the stick as though it were a tub.
Yeah, kind of.
I think so.
Yeah. Which is weird because I never grew up with tub butter. I never had that.
How do you hold it still when you're cutting through the top? It looks like that would be precarious.
Well, you're just sort
to put
of
your finger on the end.
You're just scraping it.
No, you're just sort of like scraping off like a layer from like the top middle.
Right? Is that what
I'm
you're
worried
saying?
about the slide. I'm worried about the movement because precision is important when it comes to butter. I mean, and cheese, by the way. But yeah,
it's
that
not
seems
important
like
when you're putting it on toast.
Well, you put the stick into your butter vise on your
yes, the butter gripper
countertop, and you spin it down. It holds it in place, and then you.
And then you let your child just go after it,
right?
I mean,
I don't know.
He's only getting taller and can reach them.
Does anybody else ever do that? Like, does anybody take it from just kind of like take your little butter knife and?
I mean, in fact, the measurements on there clearly denote that if you're all about precision, that you would go straight down.
I know,
the most efficient way.
I mean, we did that when we baked, but just for everyday butter usage.
Yeah. Okay. But then your measurements aren't correct if you've shaved off the top.
Well, you got a buttering stick and you got a baking stick.
You have a buttering
that I can get down with.
Because then, like in the summer, you have a stick that's like designated for your sweet corn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Right?
See?
To butter your sweet corn.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I don't. Well.
Yeah, because you put your corn right on the top and then roll it on the butter stick on the stick of butter.
Differentiating your corn butter.
We don't. To be fair, we don't eat a lot of sweet corn because Annie's not a big fan, and if
Annie says goes.
If only one of us likes something, it's usually not worth it to. So, but here's my question.
Okay.
What does the end of a buttering stick look like as it gets down closer to the bottom? It's like a bar of soap, where it gets to like a shard and there's some point. Are you throwing away some amount of butter? Are you
absolutely
what
not.
are you doing? How are you dealing with the dregs?
And it gets, you get a little valley, right? So you have your ends and you get a little valley and it gets down and then you just start taking it from wherever, or that's when you start using it in your pan and you're taking chunks off to use like in your pan.
To make your eggs with.
So no, butter is never wasted.
So you maybe have like 3 different purpose-built sticks of butter going at once. You've got your baking stick, you've got your new scraping, and you've got your your reclaimed butter from the scraping. I like that.
The 3 butter bin system from Europe, the old country.
Yeah. I don't know if we ever had 3, but I was a child, so
I really like that.
Yeah.
Shame on Tyler for bullying you into assimilating.
I did. He should have
taken that. He should have taken your tradition, in my opinion.
Well, you think he would if he grew up with tub butter, like they didn't do stick. I don't think to this day they do stick butter. So, I don't know. You think that'd be a vibe for him, but it just messed with his weird math brain and he was not about that. So, but anyways, I just was curious what it's like when you ask people like what their favorite fall dessert is or something. I want to know how you use butter.
I see.
But anyways, we're only 10 minutes into the podcast and we swear we're talking about something plant related today. And what we are talking about, which you've probably seen if you have read the title of this episode, is apples. So we're talking about apples today.
More
Apples, because
specifically, not just apples, but the organizations, local organizations, I'm assuming, that help bring apples to us in the form of maybe orchards. Is that the topic for today?
yeah, because we just kind of assumed, when this is airing, you all have probably been to some apple orchards or at least have feeling it. Maybe you're watching some Hallmark movies where they're, she's coming back from the big city as a big time lawyer and she's coming back and she falls in love with the guy who has the orchard, kind of all that jazz. And we wanted to take it back to where it all starts.
In the beginning. So where does it, and that's something that's very curious to me. And I've been lucky to work in a couple situations where orchards have started, but here in Kentucky, it is not all that common because they're pretty intensive horticulture operations. Larger businesses, they tend to be orchards are with long-term investment paybacks and implications and all that. But I've been pretty lucky in a couple of scenarios where orchards have started, but it's amazing how long they are in the planning process to get to the point of where they're actually selling anything. It's oftentimes many years from planning to getting that first apple, or peach or whatever.
Yeah, it's a long-term, commitment for an orchard grower for sure.
Yeah, I think the original thing that I was when we were talking about this topic, I was just thinking, I was ahead of my mind. People going out to the apple orchard, they're picking the apple. They have this great experience, this cultivated, authentic farm experience with agritourism and all that cool stuff that is marketing, and it's a good way for farms to make income, etc. And I was just thinking, but first the tree, but first the sapling, but first the graft. We don't typically grow apple trees from seed if we want them to be predictable.
Not recommended.
I was just thinking about the whole process that leads up to that apple being ready. And it could be that it was an action taken by somebody 10, 15, 30, 50 years ago in some cases. And just reflecting on that sometimes it's this long-term set of events and actions and everything else put in place that then yields this delicious fruit out there at the end.
It takes some time. It really does, because it seems like there's a lot of, especially with people you mentioned, like we all have, seems like a set picture in our mind what, apple orchards look like, and having this awesome experience of going to an orchard. And even that's changing in Kentucky, where, in the past 10, 15 years ago, even it was by and large, like apple specifically was modified central leader system. And it looks like an apple tree that you would expect to see in your mind when you were an elementary school age kid. Those apple trees look like apple trees. Now that's not, the trees look a little different now with, high density systems. So even that's changing. Orchards may look a little bit different, especially those newer orchards that are being put in here in Kentucky. But to get to that point is many years. Yeah, lots of business planning, I guess, Brett, where they're kind of capital intensive, and that means that you're working with banks and you're getting your enterprise budgets and things like that in place. At least the orchards I've worked with and the ones that have gotten started, they have to really give a lot of thought to all of those things because of the nature of the orchard and its intensity.
Yeah, and like for reference of people going like, I don't really know enough about orchards to know what is high density or regular and what I'm used to. So like a medium one, which is what we kind of see, if you've gone apple picking, this is probably what you've experienced in an older orchard. You're looking at about 300 trees for an acre. And for these high density ones that some of our orchards are moving to as they expand, or as we have these new orchards, they can get upwards of 1,000 trees per acre. So it's a big jump on investment.
Just like as the name says, like you said, high density, these trees are going to be planted extremely close to each other. It's going to look very different than what we are traditionally.
And irrigation, and there's a lot of
systems and that like high tensile that's used to help hold everything up. So
and just the thought that goes back to it originally, I think when I've been working on intros for these crop profiles, and when I was doing the apple one, which, when I say crop profiles, Center for Crop Diversification, if you're interested in new crops, it's kind of what we do here. We have some of these horticulture crops that you can, 1 or 2 pagers you can look at and say, like, is this something crop I'd be interested in? And that's sort of like the basics of the economics and things to consider. But anyway, so when I was like thinking about this, you're thinking about all this upfront investment. And, with apples too, there's so much about cultivar, right? You have like baking apples and fresh eating apples and, cider apples and, just all these different kinds.
Yeah.
And to think about, okay, in 10 years when I'm at full production, what is my goal? And like hoping for the best, right? Like, what if you want to go into mass wholesale of apples and then, just as an example, maybe you've got a distributor local to you and you're like, okay, I'm going to plant these apples, but is that distributor going to be around in the 5 to 10 years it takes for you to be at full production? And then what if you choose a variety that, somehow gets a bad disease or people don't like anymore, or, and just all of the thought process, and that, like, to me, like so much anxiety just thinking about, like,
Yeah.
that
Well,
you
and it's a
have
long-term
to.
investment. Yeah.
Yeah, but for something that can be so, we all know we like Honeycrisp, right? That's Jessica's favorite apple, but there's so many others out there, and like, are you going to want to do U-Pick, or are you going to stick with the baking apples? And then what happens in 10 years when you're like, oh man, I need to go do U-Pick, but I don't have the apples that are best for that. And so just kind of balancing that before you make a single dime is kind of a wild concept to think about for, not just a season. You're going to wait.
At least in the initial planning, it seems like the folks that have done really well, it almost has always, to me, involved either a formal or informal mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
You work with someone that has firsthand knowledge of the orchard business in Kentucky. That may be a university employee, but oftentimes it's another orchardist, or you're part of an association here in the state of, we're talking about Kentucky, but I'm sure it's true for other states too. You're part of an association where you can really get nitty gritty and talk details with other growers that have firsthand knowledge of, the varieties you mentioned. And not only that, but, talk about things like freezer space. And and we're just talking planning phase here. You talk how much labor, how much freezer space, is it a long, medium, short-term keeper? What's the purpose? And that's not even thinking about marketing, Brett. I know you've done a lot of work on that. And Alexis, you just mentioned it. What level are you hitting? Is it direct to consumer, which most orchards here in the state, they hit different levels of marketing, wholesale all the way down to U-Pick and everything in between. But all of those things are just in the planning phase. And at the same time, you're considering those things along with labor, and then site suitability and capacity. You're considering all of those things because it's so critically important for a long-term crop like this, to make, accurate consideration, because lots of money is going to go into setting these orchards up. Payback used to be 5 to 8 years, or production rather, not payback. Used to be 5 to 8 years with a semi-dwarf tree. We've got that down to about 3 years now. In some cases, even 2 years.
For
You're
high
starting to get
density.
limited production, for high density. So that has helped some, but all of this business planning has to go on before you stick trees in the ground. Typically, all of
and
these things are
even
going on.
once you get the trees in the ground, let's not get it twisted. It is very difficult to grow apples in Kentucky.
Yes.
Transitional zone, we'll say
it
that
is.
for Kentucky.
We have this climate that disease and pests just
Rampant.
absolutely love.
Yeah.
I like it here. I've lived here for 30 something, between 36 and I think that's right, 36 years. Love it. And so does the fire blight, and so does the scab and scale and all kinds of fun insects
and disease.
And so I think what I'm getting at with that is, again, if you're going out, or if you go apple picking this fall, just appreciate all the work that went into making sure that tree was healthy enough to produce apples, that it's open to you, that you can go out and enjoy that. I think it's on the one hand, when you're presenting it to the customer, you want it to kind of come across as effortless and down on the farm. But apples are far from throw it in the ground and wait 10 years.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, I think that's why, we don't see so many orchards, right? Like that's why you have like there's we're starting to see a few more, but like it's pretty limited with how many actual commercial growers that we have or who are doing this, because with all the planning that everyone has already talked about. And then like if you are going to incorporate all that agritourism stuff that goes along with it, and
production and
insurance,
marketing,
liability, all of that kind of things that are going along to have you out there on their farm and to make it safe. And there's a lot more that goes into apples than I think a lot of people think. I, at one point in my career, attended a couple of the fruit grower meetings when I was in a different position. And I know the apple growers would go there, and they'd also grow peaches too. I mean, we're not talking about peaches today, but one of the growers would always talk about is like a Kentucky peach is a special thing, right?
Yeah,
You have to get a Kentucky peach.
We only get one every
Keeping
5
from
years.
the choir.
2 out of 10 years. Yeah.
But really, like Kentucky apples are also a
Mhm.
special thing when you think about everything we have to do to get really great production, and the supply that these guys do have at this time of year.
Homeowners, they hold the standard of apples here that I, worked with over the years in Kentucky. They say, well, we planted a tree at home. The apples look nothing like the apples that I get at the local orchard, and it's because of those inputs, Jessica, that you just mentioned. All the care, all the scouting, all the sprays, insecticides and fungicides sometimes that are needed to have a marketable crop, and
sometimes the
an apple
variety
that
they
looks
sell you at the big box store isn't a good variety to grow here.
That's what I was
no,
gonna
Most
say.
of the
good for
time.
Washington State, but not here. Yeah.
Or that you see at this box stores a lot, that'll be like Fuji, Red Delicious, like these generals that we're used to seeing at the grocery store. But then when you go to some of these orchards, you're like, I don't see those varieties. And it's because, these growers are growing the things that they know do well. And they might be able to find you something that compares to that in flavor, if that's what you really like, right? Or they might be able to have something there that's new and different that could be a,
If
right? Like how fun is that? That like you might have access to apples that people in other states would never have access to because they, don't grow well in that state. Like I feel like that's super special and a cool why like I love buying apples locally this time of year because I'm not going to find them anywhere else any other time of year. I think
not
that's
everybody has an
fun.
Arkansas black apple. It's more of a local and regional.
I can't believe you just
thing.
brought that up. Somebody was like going
Arkansas black.
on and on about
That's
that
a good
being
one.
like their favorite apple. I've never tried
like
it,
it.
and they're like,
Shaker.
I'm going to
man.
plant a bunch of them, and
Shaker Village has a couple of them.
Do they?
Oh man, yeah.
I need to get my hands on this
You
one.
do.
Apparently, then that
It's a
sounds
good
cool.
one.
I just
But
bought
that
a bag.
local,
Yeah,
it's good stuff. I love the local angle, Alexis, that they bring. I know we're talking about apples, but when you talk about orchards, you just can't talk about apples because part of the planning is because when you're bringing these things into production, orchardists are also thinking about, well, what am I going to cash flow with in the 2 to 3 years? Even if you're setting up a high density, what are you going to cash flow with? So you're also talking about berries and strawberries, blackberries, raspberries, sometimes blueberries if you really want to challenge, particularly here in central Kentucky with our soil alkalinity and pH. But you're talking about all of those things too, because especially if you're an on-site agritourism business, and many orchards are, I mean, that they do a lot of fall events and involve themselves with that. But you're also talking about all of that. And somebody mentioned insurance, and all of that plays into it too. Once again, we're in the planning phase of our discussion right now. We're not even into storage or marketing or packaging. All of that comes later.
Pruning, all of those things.
And pruning also, while you're not getting any production, the thing of it is you're still doing insect and disease control for those 3 years. While you're waiting on the production to spin up, you're also pruning, which is a little bit less in a high density system if you're one of the newer systems. But if you're pruning a traditional orchard here in Kentucky, I guarantee you the amount of brush that comes from winter pruning, dormant pruning, is absolutely phenomenal. It is such a huge job, and that's another big benefit of these newer types of systems. There's less wood that comes out of those, but yeah, you're
And
doing
if you're
all of that while you're not
wondering,
getting production.
yeah, if you're wondering why, Ray kind of hinted at this earlier. And those like kind of traditional apple orchards that we see, we're doing mostly semi-dwarf trees, where in these high densities, we're doing like true dwarf. They're smaller, so they're just not producing as much. You're training them, but you're not necessarily pruning them as often. So that's part of it, which, cuts way back on labor costs for that time of year. Again, it's just that initial investment upfront of a trellising system. And that's why you're not having, one of the reasons you're not having to prune quite as much, because you're training rather than pruning. But it is interesting. I was looking at a news article, and we've been doing high density in Kentucky for 10 or more years now, but there's just so few orchards that when you have a new orchard come on, it's just like you might not ever know until 5 years down the road, and you're like, oh, let's go apple picking. But they were saying it used to be, when we thought about orchards, when we think about like land, labor, capital of it, land usually, capital we've already talked about, is usually pretty high. Labor used to be really high, and it's still pretty high in comparison to some other crops, but not as much with high density. But it used to be land is really high, right? You need several acres to make a living off of apple trees, if that's what you wanted now. And with this high density planting going from 300 to upwards of 1,000 trees per acre, you can make a living off of 5 acres, which used to not be the case with with orchards. You used to have a lot more, but 5 acres, sometimes less, I guess, depending on what your standards are. But you can do that. And I feel like that's really interesting, because a lot of time when we think of farms, we think about these really big areas, right? We think about 10 or more acres, or a lot more than that. But to know you could have what is truly a commercial operation, that is your full-time job on 5 acres, I think is a pretty interesting concept, especially for a lot of places in Kentucky where they don't have 5 flat acres. So you can plant trees on rolling land. And I think that's a cool opportunity for a lot of our growers in, more eastern Kentucky areas.
I think apple orchards define, a lot of times we have to define horticulture when we're speaking to groups, but you just nailed it. Orchards kind of exemplify horticulture in a way, because it's the intensity of production to bring a given crop to market. And an orchard is going to be intense for 5 acres of corn is going to be the labor required for 5 acres of corn significantly less than 5 acres of apples. That's 5,000 high density trees, roughly. But it's that intensity of production that defines horticulture, that differentiates horticulture from, let's say, row crops, is that sheer intensity of inputs, to get that to market or whatever. So yeah, that's kind of like when I think of horticulture, that's one of the things that pops in my mind visually is an orchard.
That's super cool.
I think it's important. Alexis, you were talking earlier about the 10-year slingshot effect of I'm making a decision now that will have to play out in markets and in a culture and in a context that could be very different in 10 years. And I don't know if it's just living through it myself, but it seems like the pace of change in a lot of cultural corners of the world is very fast now. But I think the thing to remember too is if you want to have a successful orchard business across the rest of your lifetime, let's say maybe you want to do this for 30 years, you kind of have to go with some of the ebbs and flows across
like
that time. Yeah. And I think one of the things, a lot of the orchards around here, their operation now looks, as far as their marketing and all that kind of stuff, it looks very different than it did even 10 years ago. They may have had a little bit of on-farm U-pick and a little bit of direct on-farm sales, and the rest of it was going to maybe a bigger buyer, or it might be that quite the opposite, that they were trying to do more and more retail, but they had opportunities where they could market through the schools or something like that. And I just think, agritourism sometimes is this novel way of marketing what was a working farm that was trying to grow stuff and market it in more traditional ways. And they sort of been able to pivot. And the funny thing is, through all of that, those trees were in the ground developing in many cases. And that issue you were talking about, Ray, of the cash flow, where it particularly pertains to when you're trying to start. If you're trying to start from scratch, that means you're going to take actions that are going to not return anything for several years.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? In other cases, it's like people will have older trees, and this is why part of why you'll see sometimes one generation will sell the orchard to another person who's taking it over, and so you have these trees that where you're not waiting; they're already in production. There are times where the trees get too old, and it's kind of let's do something different, let's start something new. But that those are some trends that I've seen in orchards around the state over the last 5-6 years, in particular, where you'll have in the case of the Reed Valley Orchard, they have this transitional effort that they've done with the folks over at Stepping Stone. What used to be Boyd's Orchard was sold to Eckert's Orchard. And honestly, when I go to those fruit meetings, there's a lot of experience. There's also a lot of gray hairs in the room, and it's a reality of farming, but it's also a huge reality of the orchard business, is that a lot of the people who are interested are aging. Have you all interacted with folks who are maybe starting out or closer to the starting out point in their journey with these orchards? Are we going to still have some orchards in 10 years?
You've already mentioned ours, Brad,
yeah.
the Stepping Stone. Yeah. They're younger.
I have one that is, I say they're like middle-aged wanting to start it. And it's just kind of ironic. He came from like Indiana or Illinois, and worked on a huge apple orchard before. And when I say it's just kind of funny, we have two very popular fall agritourism places here in Mercer County, Divine's Corn Maze and Dana Brook Greenhouses, and they are like within not even 5 miles of each other. And this guy, he knows both of them, will be also within that 5-mile range when he starts planting his orchard. And
like
wants to
Silicon
do
Valley or something.
the fall thing.
Apple Valley.
Kind of going back to what Brett said about seeing change with these orchards. So I had the opportunity to work with some of them prior to this job, and I've been here for 10 years. So I got to see some of that change, right? Because I used to go out and trap spotted winged Drosophila fruit fly we were tracking. But to see the change, and especially the changes that happened once we went through COVID, because, people were looking for things to do outside, and some of those agritourism places were just like overloaded, right? So to see their changes of how they already had stuff going, but they've increased more of their like activities for people to do that were like outside. Or you're talking about like the people who are starting up, like their trees might not be ready yet for apple production, but they go ahead and they're starting strawberries. Right. So they're already drawing people in with other things, and people are seeing the apple trees so that they know they're going to be there, and they just keep drawing them in with more of these, like I say annual crops, because a lot of them are doing like strawberries on plastic, to draw people in, have a little farm market. And so you're already building that clientele base.
I've
And
seen
that,
the farm
that
markets at
following.
orchards. Have you guys seen that? You didn't just mention farm markets, but some of these are getting to be full-fledged local food system shopping kind of venues at orchards. And I love that because it's, there's the shelf stability aspect that's year round. And I
Giving
see
all
more
the
and more of
apple
these
cider.
orchards for years. It's awesome. I love going to these local orchard shops, and you just walk in and there's all these products. I mean, I'm
and they're not
looking
all
at you,
their
cider
products.
donuts.
Yeah.
I'm looking
Like,
at you.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, cider
Sometimes
donuts too.
Yeah.
I want that. Yeah. Sometimes they're, somebody makes pumpkin butter, or there's, the local vegetable farm that's close by will have it's so it's like a little roadside stand, but a little more kitschy, right? Like a little bit more of a event to go to take the family there or something.
Yeah, I think in those it's kind of a oxymoron, I guess, but like more heavily populated rural areas, there's a real opportunity for those types of stores where you can get some meat, you could get some bread, you could get some produce, you can get sauces, and even decor for your house. And because you're not competing with, I can get, I live in Lexington, I can get to 5 grocery stores in under 20 minutes. in a lot of those rural places, that's not the case. Going to a so grocery store takes a while, and so there are that's been a really interesting phenomenon to see those things pop up. And I think in those contexts, there's people who really are, I guess hungry is the right word for those types of amenities. So as far as the UPIC side of things, that was the original thing, was maybe people were taking their kids or themselves out to pick some apples. I was talking with one of my colleagues, and he said for the first time he had seen in Kentucky, and maybe we just haven't been paying attention, that the price per pound for U-pick apples was actually higher than if you bought the pre-picked apples off the shelf in the store. Now, I had been to places in the past where, this is when I was working on one of the research farms and spending a lot of my days picking fruits and vegetables off of plants, where the price was the same. It was equal. You could either do U-pick or you could just get it out of the bin. And I was like, why on earth would I go and pick this if they've already done it for me? I was living the agritourism experience, I guess you could say. And so I wasn't looking to vacation there. But I think that that's an interesting dynamic. And the fact that they're able to do it, and this is an established place, this isn't some place that's just trying things out. The fact that they're able to do it indicates some things to me. What is your all's reaction to hearing that?
I think the experience,
yeah, I was going to say pay for the experience. I think from a grower standpoint, if I was thinking about my own trees and stuff, I think things get tore up, right? Because you see people, or like they might have signs of like, please don't climb the trees to try to get apples, but there are people climbing the trees, and so maybe charging a little more for those because you're banking on maybe some possible damage happening or something. But I think
you
people
also
pay
have
for
to
the
have more
experience.
people. You have to have more people giving directions and monitoring the situation. Insurance is going to look a little different if you're doing a U-pick. So there are certain real verifiable costs with U-pick, and that's an interesting observation, Brett, and how these groups calculate that. Because so many times I think orchards do sell the experience, and I will pay a premium for that experience to go pick, because it's not a real like price objective decision when I go to an orchard. There's a different part of my brain that engages. And we recently went to a large local orchard here in Scott County. Some of you guys know it. And we paid our, $20 a person or whatever to go to this magnificent, essentially this, to go shoot, apple cannons and do all the agritourism stuff with our 10-year-old son. And we had the best time there. It was like Kings Island on the orchard. We absolutely loved it. But, that was part of the experience that didn't have a lot with to do with growing the apples and going to pick the apples. We did do that eventually that day, but we did all the other activities, the value added stuff, I guess. I guess I'd fall under that, Brett, the value add stuff that you get people in the door and then they can do all the other related activities. Yeah, all the experiences. So there's all that going on too. And it was amazing to me that I probably saw 3,000 or 4,000 people standing around me that day. And all of them had paid to get wristbands to go into the farm on this big, beautiful, just rolling acres in the back of the farm and do all these other activities that were related to orchards, but not closely. It was a part of the orchard operation, though, from some very savvy business people.
Yeah, well, the couple of the things that just jump out from what you're saying. Another thing, or another way that people have recouped costs or preemptively gotten the costs, is by charging an admission fee.
Yes.
To go out and do it in the first place. And some people are doing both. They're charging more per pound and they're charging for the admission fee. And I think both of those are smart. And I think it's always funny. Sometimes people think that consumers can be real tight with their money. Or sometimes I've noticed producers in Kentucky, they're preemptively worried about people being mad about their prices, and people do not care. Like, they don't bat an eye at
they want what they want when they want it.
Yeah.
Ariana Grande.
Yeah, I don't know him, but
you don't pay the entrance fee.
Is he a good orchardist?
I want it. I got it. I want
it. Manzana Grande.
You had to lead us into that a little bit, yeah.
But the thinking about recouping those costs, I think what Jessica was saying about, like, they grab one apple, it has a little bit of a discoloration, they throw it on the ground and then pick another one. Well, now you're charging per pound for something that they now have taken
They didn't
double
bring
of.
back.
And
Yeah.
And there's like perfectly good apples being thrown on the ground that can be used for a variety of things.
And
And
they
once
like
it hits the ground, game over.
part of the branch down with it and stuff like
Yeah.
but you also see this adaptation to have the playground where you pay your admission fee for the playground, and there is no real, it's not. I guess certain things break down. But it's not as depreciating an asset as some other things, and you're just charging one after the other after the other. And there
Feed
is a
the
part of me.
animals with a petting zoo. Like,
Oh
Yes.
yeah, they'll go to the corn maze, all those things, and there's a part of me. The biggest part of me is like, this is a cool way for for farms to make some more money, be able to stay on the farm, etc. There is a small part of me sometimes that feels when the horticulture or the agriculture is fading a little bit into the background. There's a little bit of me that's like, I don't know, it feels a little sad or something. And I don't know if you all feel that at all, or if I'm just being overly sentimental.
I get weird
Yeah.
about every time I pass a agritourism place and I'll see like beautiful mums or beautiful hanging baskets, and like I can appreciate what went into the production of that. And then behind them is this mass of carnival rides, and I'm just like, what? And then behind them is like a beautiful field, it just, and it feels like it gets lost, but also that's what my eye is attracted to is the beautiful mums and things like that. And
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm bummed for the people who may never get the opportunity to appreciate the work that went into that, I guess. Is that like a fair way to say it? Like they're just so focused on the spinning teacups that
these
Yeah.
businesses
They don't realize
are
that
so
mom-
complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
that
truly
mom was
full-fledged
arranging-
experiences. Yeah.
And like no judgment towards them. It's more about like
Yeah.
you said, Brett, like the loss from the consumer standpoint of, they're not going there for the beautiful mums that they can't find somewhere else.
It is
that's
amazing,
healthy.
you guys, how scary. We're talking about like, these fall events which are, good times for orchards typically in the state for all these events, all these value add activities. But how scary is it if you had a really wet October in Kentucky, early September?
Oh, yeah.
And we've had those wet Octobers, and you make a large percentage of your income, a fair percentage of your income at that time on orchards. But that's all part of the thing you have to kind of take into account, and you build enough diversity in, hopefully in the planning phase, to account for like a really wet October.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked about peach growers, and I had an orchardist with 35 years of experience tell me that if you get 3 out of every 10 years, production in Kentucky with peaches, you're profitable. That was his definition. I mean, you kind of have to build this in, but it's so unique and so interesting, the orchard business to me. And it seems like the more I dig down, the more I want to know and the less I know. From a real world perspective. I mean, they're large, complex horticulture businesses.
And it's one of those things. It feels like a hard to shift perception in the mind of the consumer, because the reality is an agritourism operation in general should have activity from May through all the way through to October, November. But it's in the same way. It's like, oh, we've had one warm day. When are the tomatoes coming in at the farmer's market on April 20th?
Yeah.
And it's the same thing on the backside where it's like, oh, it's cool in the air. We can get apples now. And it's like, actually, you've been able to get apples for like a month and a half
Long
now.
time.
Yeah.
June on.
And there was a drought all summer. So
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that, Jessica mentioned COVID being this really transitional and in many ways bolstering, helpful phenomenon for a lot of the agritourism operations. I think it added a lot of some extra complexity and thinking about managing crowds and having ability to buy tickets ahead of time and reserve your spot and be able to go out and not have this overwhelming experience.
Yeah.
I think that kind of can help in having a better time when you go out in the middle of peak season. But I think in general it's been challenging for a lot of the agritourism operations, but also I see a lot of positivity from the growers and from the consumer side. So if you haven't yet, this is your reminder to try to go out and and check out an agritourism operation. Grab a few apples. If you're like me, just grab them off the shelf inside, and then go get some hot apple cider and a donut, and
Go shoot the
you don't have to do
Man,
any
I
pumpkin
work.
want a
cannon or the
donut
apple
so
cannon.
bad right now.
Yeah, I want some cider and a donut.
Oh,
Sounds pretty
I was
good.
like, there's a movie, but no, she says hot dog. I'd like a hot dog real bad. I want a hot dog real bad.
I think
I
she
want a
says it
donut.
like real bad. Yeah, like that.
I don't
I
think
forget
it's
the movie,
quite
but I
that.
remember how she said it. Yeah,
Like
as far
Jennifer
as wanting like a
Coolidge.
It's a Jennifer
thank you.
Coolidge.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
one of the movies.
You
But it's
look like
I
the
want an
4th of
apple cider
July.
donut.
Is it
Yeah.
Legally Blonde? That's
Yeah.
what it is.
Oh yeah, classic.
Did
How
you
do
look
we
like the 4th
transition
of
from orchards
July?
to
I want a hot dog real bad.
I want a cider donut real bad.
I want a cider
Yes.
donut real bad. Yeah,
I mean, I think
that's-
about fall in Kentucky, and orchards are way up at the top because I mean, you get your pumpkin, you get your donuts, you can do all of these things. And me, having the age of kid that I do, he still really thinks we're cool enough to go with us and bless us with his attendance at these things, and we just have the best time together. From zip lines to cider donuts to going and picking our own fresh apple off the tree. We love it all. It's such good stuff to do, and the variety of activities at these places. It's pretty cool. I mean, from sunflower patches, if you're just taking pictures or doing things with. Some of the farms are getting more and more into cut flowers, which is kind of a different thing, as well as the orchard. But they're finding ways to have a cash flow year round, and it's super cool. Some of the creative ways that they're doing that. But I know it's hard for a kind of a mental shift, Brett. You mentioned it. When you think of orchard, you think about it like at a certain time of the year. I used to, but now it's like you see all of the ways that they're trying to level that out throughout the year, and that's a really cool effort, and one that they're always involved, trying to stay on at the top of people's mind. When strawberries come in is a completely different time, typically when the apples are starting to come in later in the year. Yeah.
Well, I say we end on the wholesome image of Ray and his family just hand in hand dancing through the orchards, making memories. That's so sweet.
Well, actually, it was Jennifer screaming and Reed flipping upside down on a zip line, and it was fun screaming.
It was just me having a good
screaming.
time.
Yeah, we had a good time, but we like that orchard stuff. We do.
Well, awesome. We appreciate you guys being here today. We hope if you've not been to an apple orchard and maybe you're listening to this in the dreads of winter, go drink you some cider, because apple cider is good anytime. And hopefully you can find you a cider donut. And if you do, let me know where you find it, because I want to know.
Regular donuts also substitute well in case of emergency.
Honestly, it's like if a little bit of cider, regular donut, you're basically having a cider donut. So that works for anybody. But we hope you enjoyed it. Please follow us along. Hit the follow button on this podcast if you're not following already. That helps us out. If you want to leave a review and tell us the best place to find cider donuts, or your favorite fall donut flavor is also acceptable. Anything donut related is always acceptable in those reviews.
Your favorite apple variety
If
you're trying to eat
or
the
comments
apple
on butter, we'll take those too.
Or how you slice butter.
How do you slice butter?
Yeah. You can also follow us on Instagram at Hort Culture Pod. And we appreciate you. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us. Have a great one.